So, Marty, get started. Why don't you get started? Take a look at this text here. I'll take a look at it too if I get my glasses on. I've done all that without my glasses. Whew. Paul's got all these revelations coming to him. And if you read the New Testament, about half of it was penned by this guy. He wrote it down by virtue of the fact that the Holy Spirit was inspiring him to put these words on paper, and so that's what he did. And we've got a New Testament, about half of it, because of this brother. So he says, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, for this reason, to keep me from exalting myself. That's our tendency, isn't it? We do something great, we grab our lapels, whether we got them or not, and we say, hey, look at me, I did something great. And Paul is saying, to keep me from doing that, to making that mistake, I got a thorn in the flesh. A messenger of who? A messenger of Satan. This is the devil's thorn in Paul's flesh. And I believe, in the genius of God, He didn't reveal to us what it was. He didn't say it's this or it's that. Or He didn't even say it's a physical thing. Because when Paul is talking about the Spirit, he juxtaposes the Spirit to the flesh, and the works of the flesh are sinful things. So his thorn might not have been a sickness or a disease or a problem with his eyes like we hear sometimes. It may have been that. But it might have been some spiritual temptation he was wrestling with and struggling with. And he didn't want that. And so it says he talked to the Lord 3 times to take it away. And what did God tell him? He said, my grace is sufficient for you. Now, to understand what that means, we need to understand what grace is. And thankfully, we hear a lot about grace. Have you heard it's from the Greek word charis? We should hear that. That's what it's from. But I think this morning what we'll do, what I want to do, instead of simply talking about the word, the Greek word, and its meaning and its literal meaning, we're going to look at some examples of, of God's grace. After, of course, we talk about, this happens every time I preach, doesn't it? You know, I got about 3 minutes or so with hacking, and bless your hearts, you get through it every Sunday. But we're going to talk about grace, the meaning of it, because it is important to know exactly what the word means, but it's more important to know what it is. And here's what I'm saying about that. Let's say the word beauty. We'll talk about beauty. What does beauty mean? And we can say, well, beauty comes from the Latin so-and-so. Beau, meaning pretty. That's how it's spelled, I think so, somewhere. But if instead we say, look at this master's painting of a beautiful countryside, then we know what beauty is. It doesn't matter if we know what language the word comes from, and we look at that picture and go, whoa, look at that. Or when we walk outside, like I did a couple afternoons ago, and I looked at the bushes on the front of this church. Have you ever noticed the beautiful fall coloration? Bless your hearts. I don't know who you were who decided what to plant on the east side of this building, but you picked some beautiful stuff. May God bless you for that, because it's a blessing to me to look at it. The sun shines. It's just glory. That's beauty. And so regardless of what we know about the word beauty, to understand beauty, that's the main thing, to know what beauty is. And I think it's the same with grace. Because so many times in the past, let's study grace. Here's what the Greek word means. Here's a Hebrew word. No. What is grace? Grace is God's goodness that we don't deserve. If we deserved it, it wouldn't be grace. But because we don't deserve it, it is grace. And here's what I think God is saying to Paul. He's saying, I got this thorn in the flesh, Lord. I don't want to have this thorn in the flesh. Will you remove this thorn in the flesh from me? And I think what God is saying when he talks about grace, he's saying, Paul, I'm going to be so good to you that this thorn won't even be material to you at all. You won't care about it, because I'm going to be so good to you through this mess. I believe that's what God is saying to Paul. When we talk about grace, we're talking about God's goodness that we don't deserve. And the thing of it is, we see this grace, we see this goodness on almost every single page of the Bible. And I want to go back and take a look at some goodness. When you look at the creation, as a matter of fact, what does God say about the creation 6 times? It's good. It's good. That's His goodness. By the way, when He was saying that those 6 times, where was man? Well, He hadn't made man. He made man on the 6th day, on the last day. And when He wrapped up, He said everything was very good. Very good. So He had made all that good stuff for man before He even made man. He made a wonderful environment that was in its perfection. Could you imagine going to the places we go for vacation, like to the beach or to the mountains or wherever you go for vacation, down to the lake? You go to someplace exotic, maybe Henrietta or someplace, where? No, I'm not. That's not a slap at Henrietta. I'm just saying someplace is nice and beautiful and wonderful for you. You go there. What if you could go there and know that the next time you go, there won't be any sin in that place? That everybody you run into is going to have a godly spirit about them, and you too will have a godly spirit. What if there's love everywhere you go, and there's kindness, and there's joy, and there's peace? And you're not going to some place that's just physically beautiful, you're going to some place that is spiritually and emotionally beautiful. That's the goodness that this world was originally created with. And that is the grace of God before He even brought man into existence. But then He does bring man into existence, and He puts him in the garden, and He says, eat from anything you want. What is that? That's the grace of God. That's His goodness. Eat from any tree you want. And I got to believe, I mean, you and I, we know what it's like, hit and miss today with fruits and vegetables. You get a tomato at the store. You take it home and you slice it, and you put that salt and pepper on there, and you take a bite of it. It's like, oh, that's kind of grainy. That's not the best tomato. If you want a good tomato, talk to Chuck Eckert. Man, that guy's raised some good tomatoes. Or you get a watermelon. And I know you're like me with watermelons. You look at it, oh yeah, it's got that spidering on there. That's good. And it's got that yellow spot. That's good. And it's round. That's good. It's got that brown stuff. That's all good stuff. And you thump it, and boy, it sounds good. You take it home, you cut it open, and let's throw this away. Or you bite into an apple and you go, oh man, this is the best apple I've ever had. It's sweet and the juice is just running down and it just crunches off, and you're eating this thing going, this is fantastic. Well, that's God's grace. That's His goodness. And in a fallen world with fruits and vegetables, sometimes we don't see it, but when we do see it, we know what the world must have been like. I just have an inkling that no matter how good a tomato is today, it was better in the garden. No matter how sweet and crunchy an apple is today, it was better in the garden. And now, maybe an apple is a bad choice because a lot of folks think that forbidden fruit was an apple. It wasn't an apple. It was something else. We see it pictured as an apple. That's just people that don't know their Bible. And I'm not being unkind. I'm just saying, hey, that's the facts. But that was grace. And it's still grace because we still have good things given to us. And I want you to look back at Genesis chapter 39, another aspect of God's grace, His goodness and His kindness. You know who Joseph was? He was the second youngest brother of Jacob. And Jacob loved him so much, he made that coat of many colors, and his brothers got jealous of him, and they were so jealous and hated him so much, they wound up selling him into slavery, and he was taken down into Egypt. Well, this is what happened while he was down in Egypt. Genesis chapter 39, verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph, so he became... Whoa, wait a minute. The Lord was with Joseph? If the Lord was with Joseph, how come he got sold into slavery? Can the Lord go with you into slavery? Oh yeah, and He'll make it a good thing. That's what we're reading about right here. The Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and how the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor. What's it say? Joseph found favor in his sight, and became his personal servant, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he owned he put in his charge. This is Joseph. I don't know what his life would have been like with his brothers, but how would you like to live with 11 brothers, or 10 at least, that just hate your guts? Ooh, should I say that? Can a preacher say that from the pulpit? But I think it's appropriate because they sold him into slavery. Actually, that was the lesser of the two evils they wanted to do. What did they exactly want to do with him before Reuben came along? They wanted to kill him. They wanted to murder the boy. And so his oldest brother comes along. No, we're not going to do that. So they sell him. He's gone. And when he's in Egypt, God gives him favor in the eyes of Potiphar, his master. And now Joseph has a life. And Scripture doesn't say this, but I'm imagining, compare the life he had and the comforts he had and the privileges and the pleasures he had in Potiphar's house that he might not have had back home. And I'm not saying it was better. I'm just saying God can take care of you wherever you are. That's what he does. What do you call that? That's his grace. That's his goodness. That's his desire to do you good even if you don't deserve it. That's what God was doing in Potiphar's house. Well, you know what happened. Potiphar's wife took a liking to Joseph, accused him of rape, and so he was thrown into prison. Aha, there you go. God doesn't take care of you. Well, wait a minute. Get down to chapter 39, verse 21. In prison, it says, the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him and gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. The chief jailer committed to Joseph's charge all the prisoners who were in the jail, so that whatever was done there, he was responsible for it. The chief jailer did not supervise anything under Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made to prosper. That's the grace of God. That's God's goodness. That's God's desire, and if you'll allow me, I will say it's his passion to do us good. How did he make Adam? And how did he make Eve? Did he not make them in his image? And he looks down on you and me and he sees somebody who exists in his image. And when you see your grandchildren, what do you think? Don't you think, oh man, there's my grandkids? There's that ornery little boy that does this and does that. But man, I love him and I wouldn't take the world for him. There's that little girl that's so prissy, I just can't hardly stand it. She's just so cute, but bring her on. That's the way grandparents think about grandkids. And we're old and tired. How does God think about us? He's not old. He's not tired. He's beyond time and age. The fervency of his care for us is just as real today as it ever was. And this is just one expression of it. To give Joseph favor in the eyes of his master when he's been sold into slavery. To give Joseph favor in the eyes of the chief jailer when he's down in prison. Don't read this and think, oh, this is just some ancient stuff that happened to some fella long ago. No, this is us getting a picture of how God works in the lives of his faithful ones. And if you're one of his faithful ones, he'll work in your life just like this. God can give you favor. He gave the Israelites favor. If you look at Exodus chapter 3, this is what it says in Exodus 3 about this idea of favor. God has sent Moses down to Pharaoh in Egypt to say, let my people go. And he knows Pharaoh is not going to do it. So this is what God is telling Moses before it all comes about. He says in verse 20 of Exodus chapter 3, Exodus 3:20, I'll stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all my miracles, which I shall do in the midst of it, and after that he will let you go. I will grant this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, and it shall be that when you go, you will not go empty-handed, but every woman shall ask of her neighbor, and the woman who lives in her house, articles of silver and articles of gold and clothing, and you will put them on your sons and daughters. Thus you will plunder the Egyptians. What's God saying? He's saying, I'm bringing you out of Egypt, and when you leave, the Egyptians are going to give you stuff. And they're not going to give you stuff because you're so wonderful. They're going to give you stuff because I am putting you as a favorable bunch of folks in their eyes. That's what God says he's going to do. That's grace. That's God's goodness. That's his desire to do good for his people, his faithful ones. And we know what they were like. They were just like us. They struggled with their faith. But God was still good to them all the time. All the time. That's what he did for them continually. And then you get to chapter 12 and you see this happen. Chapter 3 was just God telling Moses, this is what I'm going to do. And then chapter 12, we see it actually happening. Exodus 12:35, the sons of Israel had done according to the word of Moses, for they had requested from the Egyptians articles of silver and articles of gold and clothing. And the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they let them have their request. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. Gold, silver, clothing. You know, it's interesting. Ancient armies, when they would conquer a people, they would plunder them. They would take all of their wealth and collect it for themselves, called the spoils of war. But the Israelites didn't have to do that because God simply gave them favor in the eyes of the Egyptians, and the Egyptians just gave it to them. You guys are leaving? Oh, well, here, I really favor you guys. Here, have my gold. Here, let me pull these gold earrings off and give you that. Here's some clothing that I think this is great stuff. Take this with you. What were those Egyptians thinking? Well, they were thinking the way God wanted them to think, because God can do that. And if he wants you to have favor in somebody else's eyes, he can and he will do that, and that's called the grace of God. Normally we think about grace with regard to the cross, and we always should. But grace is not limited to the cross. God's grace and his passion to do you good and me good comes all the way down to every moment of our lives and the good that we enjoy in life. It's like James said. What did James say? Every good gift, every perfect gift comes down from the Father of lights. Everything you have that you enjoy comes from God. It is his grace. As a matter of fact, when you think about the creation. A while ago we talked about a beautiful picture perhaps, or something that a man could create. But then we see the beauty of the world as God made it. A couple of weeks ago, I found myself in Canton, Oklahoma, about 5 o'clock in the morning. That was before the time change. You know it's dark in Canton at 5 o'clock in the morning. And I was up on a high spot, and I looked up, and boom, there it was. The wonder of the universe just laid out for little Marty Kessler to see. And these little eyes looked up there, and they saw all those stars that you can see when you're in a place that doesn't have all the light pollution. That's what we call it. The luxury of light, and we call it pollution because it keeps us from seeing the stars, but that's why we see it as pollution, because we'd rather see the stars of God. And when you see the stars of God, you'll know, wow. And in the 19th Psalm, this is what David declared. Psalm 19, verse 1. The heavens are telling of the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring the work of his hands. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out through all the earth, and their utterances to the end of the world. In them he has placed a tent for the sun, which is like a bridegroom coming out of his chamber. It rejoices as a strong man to run his course. Its rising is from one end of the heavens, and its circuit to the other end of them, and there's nothing hidden from its heat. What's he saying? Just look outside. Look at the things that we can see in the created universe, and you see the glory of God. Haven't you ever seen something that some person has made, and it could be something as large as a house or something as small as a piece of jewelry, and you'll look at the intricacy of it and how beautiful it is and how well it seems to work for what it's designed to do, and you go, wow, whoever made that? Or you just do something as simple as bite into a cinnamon roll. And you go, whoever made this knew what cinnamon rolls are supposed to be all about. Yeah. David is saying, walk outside. Take a look around. You'll see the goodness of God because it's everywhere. You'll see it, and it can, as we put it in our vernacular, it will blow you away. There's so many good things to see in this world. Solomon wrote this in the 16th chapter of Proverbs in verse 7. He says, when a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. Now think about that. When you live in such a way that's pleasing to God, God will make even your enemies to be at peace with you, and somebody might come back and make the, oh, wait a minute, you just told us about Joseph, and Joseph had brothers that hated him. What happened at the end of that story? Do you remember? All those brothers that hated him came down to Egypt and bowed down before him, just like God had already showed him in 2 dreams. God will cause our enemies to be at peace with us. They didn't come down so Joseph could punish them. They came down so peace could be made. Isn't peace better than punishment? Wow. Somebody might even point to Jesus. Say, wait a minute. Whose ways were more pleasing to God than his sons? But he was crucified by his enemies. Well, that's true. But do we not read that there will come a day when every knee will bow? God will even make Jesus' enemies to be at peace with him. They will recognize his lordship as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And what are we doing along the way? We are the beneficiaries, is that the right way to put it? Of the grace of God, of his passionate desire to do us good. He's not doing us good simply because, well, I guess I got to save those people. For God so tolerated the world that he sent his only son. What's it say? For he so loved us. Why did he love us? Because of his grace, his desire to do us good. He loved us. He cared for us. And when you love somebody, don't you want to do them good? Young men, young women, listen to me. This is one of the things where I can help you understand the difference between love and infatuation. If you want to do that person good for their sake, that might be love. Any other reason? It's selfishness. Watch out. Be careful. Man, I wish somebody had set me down and told me that stuff when I was young. That would have saved a lot of confusion. Probably what they should have told me was, Marty, just forget about girls until you're 35. Or how old were we when we got married? 24? I was 24? She was 15, I think. But no, seriously, hey, when I was graduating high school, she was graduating 6th grade. So that puts it in perspective. Then you guys looking at the girls, just hold on for a 6th grader. They're great. So I don't know, is this being recorded? I don't know. But you talk about the grace of God. If you want to learn the grace of God, get married. If you want to be an upperclassman learning about the grace of God, have children. Because this is what happens. 2 people who are imperfect, as imperfect could be, get together, and what do they have to learn if that marriage is going to work? They've got to learn to give each other grace. They've got to learn to love each other and care about each other so much that all the little things that irritate and aggravate, you're going to find a way to work through that. Because you love them. You care about them. You seek their highest good. That is the grace that we learn in marriage that God has always had for us. And then you have children. And bless their hearts. Yours won't come out of the womb perfect like ours did. If you believe that, well, okay. What does Proverbs say about kids? Foolishness is born in the heart of a child, but the rod of reproof will drive it far from him. What is that? That means your kids are stupid. And they're going to act that way. Expect it. They don't know any better. They're kids. How many times as adults have you said, I wish I had the benefit of my maturity back when I was a kid? Well, you can't do that. You can't have the benefit of maturity without having taken the time to mature to the time you realize, boy, that was stupid back then. Why did I do that? Because I was a kid. I was a kid. Forgive yourself. God gives us grace and he forgives us. We ought to forgive ourselves. You look back through your own life and you say, man, I wish I hadn't done that. Well, yeah. Who doesn't have that? Forgive yourself. If God has, forgive yourself. God has shown you grace. We talk about showing grace to others. Shouldn't we also show grace to ourselves? What we see throughout Scripture is God giving His people grace, even in the worst times. It was a bad time for Joseph to be sold by his brothers. It was a bad time for Joseph to be thrown into prison, falsely charged. It was a bad time for the Israelites to be in bondage in Egypt, but God always gave grace and He gave favor and He brought His people up to the point where they needed to be, and that's what He's doing for you and me every day of our lives. He's working through your life and my life, and He's bringing about His goodness in us. And it's not because we're good, because we're not. It's because He's good, and He always is, and aren't we grateful? The most obvious way He's grateful is in having given us Jesus Christ, His Son. If you enjoy salvation today through Jesus, don't thank your lucky stars. Thank the one who made the stars. If you enjoy salvation through Jesus Christ, that's the highest amount of grace you can be given. But if you don't, you're missing out on grace that you desperately need. You may not feel it. I hope you do. I remember one guy, sinner, asked him to pray for him. This was real. Well, it was Otis Gatewood. How many of you remember Otis Gatewood? Was it a relative of your guy? No, not. Okay, I think I've asked you that and you said no. But Otis Gatewood, years ago, he was a missionary in Germany after the war. And he was a great speaker, a great preacher of the gospel. And the guy asked him to pray for him. He was a sinner. And he says, Lord, I pray that you don't give this man any rest or any peace at all until he turns to your Son. And it's like, what? What kind of a prayer is that? Well, that was the exact perfect kind of prayer that he needed. And I pray that for you. If you're outside of Christ, I don't pray that you'll have peace in your heart. I pray that you'll be upset until you realize you're compelled, you're driven to go on your knees before the Father of Jesus Christ and His Son and obey His gospel. This is your opportunity. We're going to stand and sing a song that's been selected just for you if you'd like to obey the gospel this morning or ask for prayers in this congregation. God has given grace so you can take advantage of it. Do it now. Do it now. Let's stand and sing.